2, 1. All right, can everyone see my screen here? I just need a couple yeses to know that everything's working right. Okay, perfect. And apparently you can still hear me too since you responded to my request. So it seems that everything is working just fine. So you can see here that I have a basic project set up. And what I have here, if I go ahead and hide all these layers, I have a document here. It's just a basic ActionScript 3 type document. And I have 3 layers set up, one for sky. And on the sky layer, what I have is a basic gradient. If I click on this, you can see it's a drawing object. And I've created a custom gradient here for my fill. We can go into my color panel here and we can see that custom gradient that I created. It's meant to be sort of a sky, kind of like a sunset, where we've got that gradation from blue to red. And like anything else that we often do, it's exaggerated a bit, right? You're not going to get these colors in the real world, but that's okay. Additionally, I've gone ahead and used the gradient transform tool to actually shift this gradient down a bit. So you can see with the gradient transform tool selected, what I have here is the ability to actually do this. And I'm able to actually even rotate this. So if we have it from left to right, I can move it from up to down. I can squish it so it's much more exact and precise and so forth. So what I've done here is just kind of shifted it like that. Additionally, I have a layer with hills. So these hills are, again, just basic drawing objects. I've gone ahead and you can tell by the different points here, just simply created a number of different little anchor points and twisted their arcs and so forth. So just basic drawing stuff. And that's just to set up our thing here, right? So what I want to do is actually create a sun. I have a layer for sun already up in here. And to create the sun, I'm going to use the oval tool. And we can see here that the colors that I currently have just aren't going to do for the disk of the sun. I have a green stroke color with a black fill color. That doesn't look like any sort of sun I've ever seen. So what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and turn off my stroke and change my fill to something like a nice bright orange or yellow. Maybe something like this. With that done, I'm just going to create this drawing object here. Just clicking and dragging while holding down Shift is going to actually go ahead and create a perfect circle for us, which the disk of the sun is a perfect circle. So that matches. And what I want to do though is actually create a movie clip symbol out of this. So if you remember from last week, we dealt with graphic symbols. Graphic symbols being the different mouth positions for different vowels and speech characters and so forth, and being able to jump to different frames within that graphic symbol. Here we're going to create the sun as a movie clip symbol. And what we'll do is just select this and choose Modify, Convert to Symbol, and let's just call it Sun Disk. And make sure to choose movie clip symbol, registration point at the center, that's perfectly fine, and hit OK. You'll notice in the library we now have our sun disk movie clip symbol. And with this actual instance on the stage selected, we can see it's a movie clip symbol instance of sun disk, and it gives us our position and size and so forth here. And we can move this anywhere around the stage that we want. You'll notice that since I've actually created the sun layer between the hills and sky layer, that it actually appears in front of the sky and behind the hills, which is what you would expect. So what we're going to do is just have the sun rise from here and sort of rise up in an arc, right? So to do that, we need to add some additional frames across all these different layers. So I'm going to go up to frame 60, click and drag to select all those layers, and you can see they're selected in yellow, and then choose Insert Timeline Frame. That's going to create frame spans across all of our layers. And now I'll go ahead and actually zoom out a bit because I want to position my sun like way down here, below the mountains, right? So with that done on this initial keyframe, I can click on this frame span here and choose to create a motion tween. When I create a motion tween, you notice it turns blue on this layer. And something else you might notice is that with a motion tween, we only need a single keyframe. We don't need to have multiple keyframes as we do with classic tweens or shape tweens, as we've seen in the past. Motion tweens are actually a very simple way of animating things, but as you'll see in a moment, it's very powerful as well. So in order to create keyframes with a motion tween, what we do is move the playhead to someplace else. So in this case, I've moved it to frame 60. And then we simply move the object. So we've moved that to frame 60. And you'll notice a number of different things have happened here. For one thing, we have this little diamond-shaped keyframe. And that's one of the differences between a motion tween and some of the other tweens that we've seen in the past, like a shape tween. We don't have that normal circle that's filled as a keyframe. We have this little diamond keyframe. So if you're used to After Effects, it might be a little bit similar to what you've seen there. And really anywhere that I place this, we can adjust the position of the sun here and create a different tween. However, as I mentioned before when we were talking about arc, in the principles of animation, you'll notice we have this motion guide here. And it's this path that's on our stage. And this motion guide actually works exactly like any other sort of path within Animate. So for instance, if I unlock my hills layer and using my selection tool with nothing else selected, as I hover over any edges of my shapes, you'll notice my cursor turns into like this kind of curved cursor here, and I can click and drag to modify any of my shapes like that. You can do the exact same thing with a motion guide. So if I hover over here, you can see that same transformation happen on my cursor, and I can go ahead and make my sun do all sorts of, crazy movements here. I'm going to want it to look sort of natural, so let's do something like that. So we have this nice arc here, and if I preview this, we can see that arc occur. An additional thing we can do to make this even more natural is to go ahead and select anywhere within this frame span, and you can see in the Properties panel, we've selected the motion tween. So with the motion tween selected, we're actually able to go ahead and adjust the easing here. So I can adjust the easing down, and that's going to perform an ease in. So if I take that all the way down to -100, you can see that each one of these frames bunches up toward the beginning. So if I play back, it starts off really slow and then evens off. We can do the inverse as well by going to 100, and then you can see that's an ease out. And it'll start out really fast and then sort of ease off into there. To reset this, you just need to set the ease to 0, and then it's going to be a completely linear ease. So in terms of slow in and slow out, as we saw, this is the part where you're going to want to use the motion editor. So you've noticed that I expanded my timeline up quite a bit. The reason I've done that is because the motion editor actually resides within the timeline itself. And how you access it through a motion tween is you double click on the motion tween. So if I double click on this blue, there we go. There's our motion editor. And we can see for our location X and Y, what we've got here is a very linear sort of progression to our animation. Additionally, what we have here is a set of easing presets. So we can see here, we can choose no ease, a number of different simple eases, and it gives you a little preview in this graph here. And we also have, of course, stop and start. So as you can see, this looks very similar to the ease in, slow out stuff that we saw before. So let's actually do that. We'll choose that. And the motion editor is something that you can really spend a lot of time in if you want to. We're just introducing it in this course, but you know, you can expand to fit to view, and it fits the timeline to your view so that you're able to work much more readily in it. You might want to choose fit in window in your zoom up here in order to see the entire stage. And you can preview how this is going to look, of course, just as you would anywhere else. Additionally, you can use the controls down here if you want to. And I'm actually going to change this to slow because that looked a little too fast to me. That's a bit better. It probably doesn't even come across on Connect because it's a bit choppy usually on Connect, but there we go. So an additional thing we can do is select various properties. So you can see here, I've got location, X and Y. Let's actually go ahead and add a glow to our sun. So to do that, what we're going to do is select the instance itself. And you'll notice over here we have filters. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a blur filter because usually the sun you see a little bit blurry at least, right? So there's a 16 pixel. Let's make that 10 pixel blur along both X and Y. And you can also stack these things. So I can also add a glow to my sun. And let's sample from the sun itself and then just lighten it a bit through the color picker here. And then I can go ahead and sort of blur that out. And not that much. We can increase the strength and so forth. All right, so now if we go ahead, and I'm going to just do a Control Enter or Command Enter so that we can see this go. And you can see how those effects are applied. And you'll notice that it starts off as red in terms of my glow. So I need to fix that. I'm going to go back down here. And you can see that the glow and the blur both start out right now as their sort of their defaults. So what I want to do is make that the same thing. I don't want the blur and glow to change over time. So thankfully that's pretty easy to do. I can go ahead and copy all filters and then just move down here, select my sun and say paste filters. Oh, and look what it's done. It's got multiple blur and glow filters. So if you want, you can always click minus on these guys to remove them. And then let's paste them again. And there we go. Then I have my blur and glow. And if I test once again, there we go. Something additionally we can do, which isn't something we might really want to do in this case, but it could look kind of interesting, is to add some sort of a blend mode to this. So if you're used to using Photoshop, you may be familiar, you most likely are familiar with different blend modes that you can place on the different layers in Photoshop. So some things that you have here, you have layer, darken, multiply, and so forth. So here's multiply, and we can see how that looks as it goes across the gradient. Of course, it changes. These different blend modes, what they're going to actually do is change how the object right here interacts with all the layers below it. So we can see how the gradient goes right here. And let's actually zoom in on that a bit so you can see it better. You can see how this is actually interacting and blending with the gradient, right? So here's subtract. If you want a blue sun, that works. Difference, and you can see how that gradient of the sky is actually applied to this. It's pretty cool. If I choose add, that actually looks pretty neat with add there. Let's go ahead and test with that. I mean, that's a brilliant sun right there, right? I mean, that looks awesome. So I'm actually going to keep add. I wasn't going to keep any of these blend modes on there, but that looks cool. So I'm keeping it. It's like white hot sun. So there are our blend modes and filters. And if we go back into our motion editor here, oh, that's odd. So we should actually be able to see, oh, you know what it is? So I was expecting to see our filters here as well, which filters do show up in the motion editor. However, we're not actually changing the filters because I've got them the same all over the place. If we were to actually change the filters, they would show up here, and we could apply easing to those filters as well. If you want to go ahead and choose a specific property, you can actually change the easing either through going through the easing presets for X and Y, so they can both have completely different eases if you want to. Or you can actually use this tool right here to add anchor points to the graph. So when you do that, you're able to actually add these anchor points, and you can change very drastically how things work. So if I collapse our motion editor by, again, double clicking, and oops, I didn't quite mean to tear my timeline out of there. So let's redock that. And my output panel. There we go. All right, so you can tell this is a little weird, right? So let's go ahead and test that out. So that's kind of neat, right? So that's the amount of control that you have when you're dealing with the motion editor. It's very, very powerful. Even though motion tweens, as you saw, are very, very easy to just kind of like move to a different playhead, shift things around. It'll automatically set those keyframes for you. You know, the motion editor itself, just double clicking on that motion tween, you have a huge amount of control over how things work. So it's really, really neat. And, you know, we've made our sun kind of, you know, behave like a serpent here, which would be really frightening for most people if that happened in real life. So with that done, there's one more thing that we want to see, and that is masking. So the way masking works is that a mask will actually hide anything it's not covering. So the mask you can think of as a window into whatever layers are masked below it. So let's have a look at how masks work. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and create an additional layer right here. I'm going to call this Alt Sky for Alternative Sky. And what I'll do is actually, let's go ahead and just copy the present sky here. So I did a Control-C to copy it, and then I'm going to paste in place. Oops, and I just pasted it in the same layer, which I don't want to do. Let's paste it in our Alt Sky layer. And then we can go ahead and make some adjustments to it. I'm going to choose once again my Gradient Transform tool. And let's just change the gradient. So that's pretty good. So to actually create a mask, what we need to do is create a new layer, right-click on it, and choose Mask. So what that's done is it's created layer 3 as a mask layer, which you can tell because the icon changed to have like a square with a hole punched in it. And then the layer that was directly under that is going to be nested within that mask layer. And this is going to be the content that's actually masked. So here I'm going to change layer 3 into mask sky. And of course, you can name these things whatever you want. And what I need to do is actually create some sort of a shape inside of this layer. So let's go ahead and just create a simple oval here. And whenever I create things that don't actually appear inside Animate, I usually create them in this like bright green color because that's a color that I hardly ever use for anything else. It sort of signifies for me that I'm dealing with elements that don't appear as visual elements on the stage. So for instance, let's create our mask right here. And a little trick here for our hills, since they're obscuring things, we can always turn on outline mode here. So we can still see the outline of the hills, but we're able to work with our actual mask. Now, you can tell that the mask right now just looks like a green blob, and it's not looking like a mask. To actually see the mask applied within Animate, you need to have locked down both the layer or layers, since you can mask multiple layers at once, the layer that is masked, so Alt Sky, and also lock down the mask layer. So we can see here how that works. Now, anything that's underneath that mask shape within my mask layer, we can see. It shows that, and it hides everything else. See? So what we want to do is actually animate this mask as the sun rises. So to do that, we can do a simple shape tween. So going down to frame 60, I'm going to choose Insert, Timeline, Keyframe, and then right-click between those two keyframes and choose Create Shape Tween. And then here, all I need to do is use my free transform tool to go ahead and expand and move and do whatever else I want to do to that mask. So once I lock that down, and that doesn't look that great, but I could always go ahead and modify that, right? So, that looks better. Still not perfect, but anything like this, it takes a lot of tweaking to get entirely right. So if we test this now, Control or Command Enter, we can see how that mask layer works along with our sun. So that's pretty neat. I actually think I like it better without the mask stuff, but that's one thing to demonstrate here is masking, which is very important to know. So, that's how you mask. So that's the end of my demo here. I'm gonna stop this particular recording, and